I had my microphone plugged into my phone for this recording, and I completely forgot to turn my microphone on. So I'm doing a voiceover, so apologies in advance if the voice in the video seems off. Two years ago, at the age of 43, I found out I was pregnant for the first time. I knew I was pregnant for exactly 1 month. And that 1 month brought me so much joy. Then I went to my first ultrasound. There was no heartbeat, and I had miscarried. Of course, there was devastation, there was grief, and there was recovery. What surprised me was what that recovery actually looked like, because it was nothing like what I thought recovery from a miscarriage was supposed to look like. Mine was a missed miscarriage. My pregnancy had stopped developing, but my body had not recognized the loss and had not started the usual miscarriage process. Every week they checked my pregnancy hormones, and every week it was not going down at all. Meanwhile, every day I felt myself becoming more and more depleted, more disconnected, more numb. It wasn't just sadness, it was this growing nothingness. I felt like somebody was slowly turning me off from the inside. And I am here today because Sue Agoyo, founder of Kassy's Kause, recognized that maternal mental health does not only matter after a live birth. She reached out to me because depression can happen after pregnancy loss too. My name is Catherine Carnell. You can call me Kat. And I am the founder of Beautifully Unhinged. And despite the miscarriage, I somehow still managed to birth 3 books. They're called the Lucky the Bird series. What I experienced was not postpartum depression. I want to be very clear about that. But I did experience depression after pregnancy loss. And when I eventually started reading the lived experiences of women with postpartum depression, I recognized an awful lot of that language, the emotional language. That's what brought me here. And today I want to talk about communication, specifically how we communicate when somebody we love is going through something we cannot fix. Because sometimes the most important thing we can do is make the hard thing sayable. So I'm struggling with holding my iPad and my microphone, so I couldn't click on the remote control to flip through the slides. So I'm calling my husband up for help. When you don't have words for what you're feeling, while I was going through my recovery, I had never felt anything like it. And how do you put words to something when you don't even have the vocabulary for? I certainly didn't. And one thing about me is that I have a hunger for knowledge, especially when it comes to the human body. So I researched and I researched and I researched some more. I could find medical explanations. I could find things written by doctors about miscarriage and recovery. But what I couldn't seem to be able to find at the time was somebody saying, this is what it actually feels like. I wanted somebody to explain this thing to me that had taken over my body. So I went back to what I already knew how to do. At the time, I was a medical massage therapist. Over the years, I had learned how to communicate with clients in a way that helped them give me information they normally weren't comfortable giving somebody. And no, I didn't manipulate people for information while they were practically naked on my massage table. What I learned was how to create an environment where somebody felt safe enough to tell me their truth. Sometimes a client would start crying. I wasn't their counselor, and that wasn't my job. Sometimes all I needed to say was, it's okay to cry. You are safe here, and then I'll shut up. Sometimes silence is the first space somebody has had where they're actually allowed to feel whatever they've been trying not to feel. The conversation I had with Josh before I needed it. Thankfully, I had already had a conversation with my husband, Josh, before any of this happened. When I found out I was pregnant, I sat him down because I know my husband. I knew that if I was upset, his instinct was going to be to fix it. So I told him, look, I'm pregnant. My hormones are probably going to send me into some emotional tornadoes and chaos. And I told him if I was crying, if I was angry, yelling, overwhelmed, whatever was happening, I didn't need him to solve it. I needed him to hold me, to hold my hand, stroke my hair, keep some kind of contact with me depending on what I needed at the time. You can't fix my hormones, but you can be present for me. I had no idea how important that conversation was going to become because then I miscarried. The situation completely changed. But what I needed from him did not. If anything, I needed it more. And I told him, I have never felt anything like this. I don't even know how to describe this pain. And honestly, the word pain didn't even touch the surface of what I was feeling. But because we had already talked about what support looked like for me, Josh did not have to figure it out while we were both drowning. He didn't have to understand it. He did not have to fix it. He could just stay with me. And I want to make something very clear here. I had specifically told my husband beforehand what I needed. So I'm not telling anybody, if somebody says leave me alone, ignore them and grab them anyway. No. What I am saying is know your person. For me, stay with me meant touch at the time during my miscarriage. For somebody else, it might mean sit across the room, but don't leave. It might be give me 20 minutes and come back, which was usually what I needed before this miscarriage. And for some other people, it might mean don't touch me, just listen. Support is personal. The day my body started coming back, every week I was still getting labs, and every week my HCGs were not declining. Meanwhile, physically, I was becoming more and more depleted. Then one morning I woke up and my physical energy was back. Not a little bit, but in full swing. I felt rejuvenated, and it was such a relief. And that happened to be the same day I went in for my weekly labs. And for the very first time, my HCGs had finally dropped. And I remember thinking, there you are. My body is back. But emotionally, I was still gone. My physical energy came back, but the emotional numbness was still there. The depression was still there. I realized my physical recovery and my emotional recovery were not happening on the same timeline. My body was coming out of a pregnancy. Emotionally, I was trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. And I was grieving. I had lost a baby. I had lost what could have been. I had lost a future I had already started imagining. I felt like I had lost a part of what womanhood meant to me. For a while, I described myself as the walking dead. I wasn't necessarily crying all day. Sometimes I couldn't feel anything at all. It felt like my emotional connection had simply been switched off. Even my skin sometimes felt different to me, almost numb. And because I had no better explanation at the time, I landed on postpartum depression. I thought, I've heard postpartum depression is horrible. And right now, I feel downright horrible. So why wouldn't this be postpartum depression? It wasn't, because I didn't have that live birth. But once I started doing the right research and reading the lived experiences of women with postpartum depression, I started recognizing things. Where our experiences meet, the depletion, the numbness, feeling disconnected from yourself, loss of pleasure, not recognizing yourself, feeling like a zombie. That language sounded very familiar to me. Our circumstances were different. Our physical experiences were different. But emotionally, there was a lot that I recognized. And then there is another kind of loss that almost nobody talks about or even recognizes as grief. A woman may be losing a huge part of who she was, her freedom, her autonomy, her spontaneity, her career, her privacy, the version of herself that existed before this baby. In a very real way, one identity is dying while another identity is taking up almost all of the space. And that can create grief. She may deeply love her baby and still grieve the woman she used to be. She may be gaining this enormous identity of mother while feeling like every other part of her has been pushed to the edges. Research into women's recovery from postpartum depression has actually described a shattered role identity and feeling trapped and breaking down as parts of that experience. And on top of everything else, she's supposed to be happy. She wanted this baby. Everyone is congratulating her. So now imagine how difficult it can be to admit, I love my baby, but I miss my life. Or I wanted this, but I feel trapped. Or I don't recognize myself anymore. Those are hard sentences to say because somebody may hear, I don't love my baby, when what she actually said was, I don't know who I am anymore. That needs to be sayable. Now let's talk numbers. This isn't some tiny group of women. About 1 in 8 women with recent live birth report symptoms of postpartum depression. 1 in 8. And there was another study that really caught my attention. Researchers looked at almost 2,000 women. At 9 to 10 months postpartum, 161 women reported depressive symptoms. Of those 161 women, 86 of them had not reported those symptoms at 2 to 6 months postpartum. That's 57.4%. More than half of them reported this after that 6-month mark. That doesn't tell us why. Their symptoms could have developed later. They could have changed over time. And maybe they didn't recognize them, and that's why they didn't report them earlier. We don't know. What we do know is that they had not reported them earlier. So here's my question. Who is still asking how she's doing at month 9? Everybody comes around with when the baby is born. How are you? How's the baby? Do you need anything? And then life moves on. Everybody goes home. The casseroles stop showing up, but she's still there. Speak up is only half of the conversation. We tell people all the time, if you're struggling, speak up. Okay, to whom? And what happens when they do? A 2025 study interviewed women who had experienced postpartum depression and looked specifically at how they decided whether to disclose what they were going through. The women described challenges talking to family members, coworkers, and even healthcare professionals. So we can tell women to speak up all day long, but we also have to become the people they feel safe speaking to. And that is where Make It Sayable really begins. When they make it sayable, hear them. When somebody finally says something, hear them. HEAR. H stands for hear. Actually listen. Not because you're preparing for a comeback. Not because you're building advice in your head. Listen because you're trying to understand and give them your attention. If your phone is in your hand, put it down. You may know you're listening while you're looking at it, but they don't. If it took everything in her to finally say, I don't feel like myself, give her your face. Give her your eyes. Give her your full attention and hear her. E is for explore. Remember that you may not have understood her correctly. So ask gentle, open-ended questions. Tell me more about that. What's been the hardest part? What does trapped feel like for you? And please don't ask, why do you feel like that? She may have no freaking idea, and that's part of the problem. Don't say, but you wanted this baby. She knows that. Don't tell her she should be happy. She knows that. If logic could get somebody out of depression, we would have cured depression a long, long time ago. And even if you've had postpartum depression yourself, you had your experience. You're trying to learn about hers. A is for acknowledge. Tell her what you think you heard. So it sounds like you love your baby, but you feel like you've disappeared. Or you're exhausted, but this feels like more than just being tired. Then let her say, yes, that's it. Or no, that's not what I mean. Either way, they are both useful information. You are not assuming. You are checking. R is for respond. Ask, what do you need from me right now? Do you need me to listen? Do you want me to hold you? Do you need space but don't want to be alone? Do you want help figuring out what comes next? Sometimes she'll say, I don't know, and that's perfectly okay too. That's also information. And sometimes what she's telling you is much bigger than what the two of you should carry alone. Then you can say, I love you. I'm here. And I think this is bigger than what the two of us should carry alone. Can we find somebody who can help us through it? If what she's saying makes you concerned that she or the baby may be in immediate danger, that's when professional or emergency help needs to become part of the response. So here, explore, acknowledge, respond. HEAR, here. If we're going to ask people to make things sayable, we need to know how to hear them when they finally say it. Seems I'm going a little fast. And what about the spouse? I also want to talk about the person standing next to her. Sometimes we talk about the spouse as though he's this perfectly healthy emotional support machine whose entire job is to take care of mom, but he's not. He may be completely freaking out too. He's watching somebody he loves become depleted, disconnected, depressed, and he may also be taking on a much bigger role of sharing of sorry, a much bigger share of caring for the baby. Feedings, diapers, soothing, late nights, appointments, the house, whatever she may not have the capacity to carry right then. So now he's thinking, how do I help her take care of this baby, keep everything else going, and somehow keep myself together? He can't get inside her body. He can't feel what she's feeling. He can't take any of it away for her. And watching somebody you love suffer while being unable to make it stop can leave you feeling lost, helpless, useless, and probably downright defeated. Research looking specifically at couples navigating maternal postpartum depression has emphasized that postpartum depression affects the couple, the children, if they have any, the surrounding family, but not only the mother. And fathers can become depressed too. A large analysis of more than 28,000 participants estimated prenatal and postpartum depression in fathers at about 10%. It also found a relationship between maternal and paternal depression. That does not mean her depression automatically causes his. It means there may be two struggling people in that household. He gets to make things sayable too. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I feel helpless. I'm struggling too. Supporting her should not require him to disappear. You don't have to fix her. This is why that conversation I had with Josh became so important. I had already given him permission to stop trying to solve me. You don't have to understand this. You don't have to fix this. Just stay with me. Because fix her? Really? It is an impossible assignment. But to listen to her, you can do that. Sit beside her and hold her hand, you can do that. Help her find professional support, you can absolutely do that. And research supports involving partners. In one randomized study involving 388 couples, a couple-based intervention produced better early postpartum depression outcomes than either an intervention focused only on the mother or standard care. I am not telling you holding hands cures postpartum depression. It doesn't. I'm saying the partner matters. The relationship matters. Communication matters. Sometimes what helps someone who feels completely useless is realizing that being present is doing something. What did we learn about emotions growing up? This brings me to something that isn't the main point of my talk, but it also matters for what happens next. I was raised by a father who taught me not to cry. Don't show weakness. Be strong. And guess what? I was really good at that. I grew into somebody who could make people believe Kat is strong. Kat doesn't need anybody. Kat's got this. There was one teeny tiny flaw in that plan. Nobody taught me what to do when life handed me something that was too big to hold in. So when difficult adult experiences came along, I didn't have suddenly a beautiful emotional vocabulary. I had years of practice doing the exact opposite. I knew how to hold it together until I couldn't. I've fallen apart in front of strangers, coworkers, sometimes at the most inconvenient moments imaginable. Because apparently emotions won't check on your calendar before it decides to arrive. And I know, and I don't think our parents necessarily did this because they were terrible parents. A lot of them were teaching what they had been taught, what they know. Be strong. Don't cry. Keep family business in the family. Don't burden other people. Move on. And there's research behind the idea that the way adults handle emotion can affect what children learn about emotions. Research has found that when parents suppress emotion, it can change things like warmth and responsiveness during interactions with their children. Other research has found evidence that patterns of emotional invalidation can carry through families across generations. Nobody has to sit a child down and say, hide your pain. Sometimes they learn it by watching what happens when pain enters the room. And then one day, we are the adults. And adulthood gives us something too big to hold in. But holding it in is the only thing we know and have ever practiced. Generational permission. So what happens if we practice something different? This is something I call generational permission. I'm not presenting it as an established psychological theory. It's the name I've given to an idea that grew from my own experience and from what I've learned about family communication. What if our children grew up seeing that adults can cry and still be strong? What if they hear us say, I'm struggling? What if miscarriage isn't a word everybody whispers behind closed doors? What if a mother can say, I love my baby, but I miss my old life, and nobody looks at her like she just confessed to a crime? It doesn't mean dumping every adult problem onto our children. And our children don't owe us disclosure. It means creating an environment that says, if something hard ever happens to you, You are allowed to talk about it here. But saying that once isn't enough. If somebody has spent years learning that hard things aren't safe to talk about, they may not believe us the first time we say, "You can tell me anything." Safety has to become consistent. They need us, they need to see what happens when they tell us something uncomfortable. Do we listen? Do we panic? Do we judge? Or do we keep showing them, "You can bring the hard things here"? Maybe the first thing they tell us isn't the biggest thing. Maybe trust builds little by little. And every time we respond with care, we teach them something new. Speaking does not have to cost me connection. Maybe they teach their children, and those children teach theirs. And that's what I mean by generational permission. But generational permission is the future ripple. Make it sayable is what we can do right now. I cannot promise that communication will prevent postpartum depression. It won't. Postpartum depression is a real medical condition, and communication is not a replacement for treatment. I can't promise the perfect question will make somebody tell you everything. I can't promise that listening well gives us control over every outcome. But we can control what kind of person somebody finds when they finally decide to speak. And we can keep being that person consistently, because they may not tell you the hardest thing the first time. Trust takes repetition. Safety takes consistency. So keep showing up in a way that says, "When you're ready, I can hear it." Sometimes the sentence that needs to become sayable isn't, "I'm depressed." Sometimes it's, "I don't feel like myself." Or, "I'm scared to tell you what I've been thinking." Sometimes it's, "I don't know what I need." Or simply, "I need help." We spend a lot of time telling hurting people to speak up. Let's spend just as much time learning what to do when they finally do. Let's create space for people to be honest about what they're actually feeling. Let's give mothers room to love their babies deeply and tell the truth about how motherhood feels. Let's give partners permission to say, "I'm struggling." Let's make grief sayable. Let's make depression sayable. Let's make "I don't know what I need" sayable. "I need help" sayable. And when somebody finally says it, hear them. HEAR. Hear, explore, acknowledge, respond. Hear. And then keep being someone they can come back to again and again, until safety is not something you have to promise them anymore. It's something they will know. Why don't we give the next generation something different to inherit? Make the hard things sayable now, so the next generation doesn't have to learn silence first. Thank you. On another note, I donated my books to the silent auction today. If you happen to win one of them, come find me afterward, and I'd love to add a personalized note. The first two books were written to help with communication through miscarriage, one from my perspective and one from my husband's. The third book is my personal story inspired by the miscarriage, but it goes much further into what happened afterward, when my world started falling apart, and what it took for me to heal, build resilience, and find hope again. You can scan the QR code for today's research studies, additional resources, and more about my books. Feel free to take a picture of this slide so you have it for future reference. I also have books with me today, so if you'd like one, or if you have questions about anything I talked about, come find me during the break. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for being here.